It's my great pleasure welcoming all of you, the three panelists, very eminent panelists for today's webinar, which is on corporate governance and interorganizational partnership, digitization and deployment of essential health and emergency systems, quite relevant to smart city development and all the people who are in the audience. I'm Suresh Srivastava. I'm the director of the IIT Kanpur-La Trobe Research Academy. And with me, Dr. Professor Anirudh Desai, he's the co-director. So he's from La Trobe University. Now, before I start, it's my pleasure introducing very briefly the Academy, because this is the third webinar in series. We had the launching of the webinar series in January with our Joint Secretary, Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. Our inter-regional partnership, we value a lot. So we have focused on 10 thematic areas. I think all those which are required for a smart city development, starting from infrastructure technology, economic development, mobility, transport, health, well-being, food security and agriculture, urban planning, and then security, safety management, cultural heritage, energy, water and waste, and most important is the governance and community engagement, where Professor Fani and Dr. Julie, they are the theme leads. So each of the themes are led by three eminent professors, two from IIT Kanpur and one from La Trobe, and we have a team of about 170 faculty and staff from both the sides, which are working in different themes. So it is a great effort, and we are trying to engage the industries more and more, because ultimately we want it to come out in the form of the adoptable technology, which can go directly to the field. And with the help of our joint degree program students and also researchers through various projects, we would evolve those models. And it will be not only commercialized, but also we are thinking of making it available for larger adoption in various upcoming smart cities. So that's all about the IIT Kanpur-La Trobe Research Academy in brief. And I invite all those who are attending this webinar and those who are not part of the academy to join it. And so before I hand over to Dr. Julie, who has kindly agreed to moderate this session, and she will be steering the whole show of this webinar. So it's my duty to briefly introduce her. I could get some information about her from her website. She has done Bachelor's of Arts and PhD from the University of Melbourne, Australia. And at present, she is campus director at La Trobe University, Community Planning and Development at Bendigo campus. She was also a strategic planner at Albury City Council during 1999 to 2006. And very interesting things I can read about her. Julie explores interaction between policy, place, and people, with a particular focus on how children, young people, and people from different ethno-cultural and religious backgrounds view, and experience their environments. Her main interest is how we create a public knowing of risk, safety, and belonging that encourages or limits people's freedom to use public space confidently. She supports active citizenship through community participation and planning. Students in her subjects are encouraged to critically appraise community planning and development theory and its application in practice in both richer and poorer countries. In addition, students are challenged to grapple with issues of power, professional ethics, and the role of community development practitioners as knowledge producers and users in relation to data production, analysis, and interpretation. With this brief introduction, I request Julie to take over the show and first introduce the two eminent speakers, and please moderate the webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Srivastava. I really appreciate that kind introduction. And I'm really excited about tonight. And although I'd like to just barge right in and start on the topic, I will actually introduce our guest speakers. So the first speaker I will introduce is Professor B.V. Fanning, who is the head of department and professor industrial management and engineering at IIT Kanpur, and the governance and engagement co-theme leader. He represents IIT Kanpur-based researchers. His multifaceted engagement during the professional tenure that he's been having is 16 years of teaching, engagement in finance, innovation, and entrepreneurship across various top management skills in India and abroad. He introduced and taught almost 20 new courses during this time span. And as an avid researcher, he has 31 research and policy publications in the last 10 years in A-star A and B category journals, and presentations in over 35 conferences. So being a highly productive researcher is exposed others to a lot of his work, as well as his work that he's done as head of the IP management, through which he has facilitated the filing of 400 patents. So apart from teaching and research, he served in administrative capacities at IIT Kanpur through various roles like deanship, professor in charge, chief investigator, faculty coordinator. And he's been invited to be a member of more than 20 policy and evaluation committees by the government in India in the innovation ecosystem space. And this is in addition to 12 years of industry engagement in senior positions. So in this case, Fanny provides us a great straddling between the academic world and how academic expertise can inform what governments do in this space, while his practical experience gives him insight into the types of questions we'll be asking tonight. Natalie McDonald is the Chief Executive Officer of the Country Fire Authority. And prior to this appointment in this role in February 2021, Natalie was Vice President, Strategy and Development at La Trobe University. So a very large corporation with multiple units, as most universities are. In her 8 years in this role, Natalie focused on forward strategy of the university and the transformation of its campuses to create economic growth, community value, and high quality research, teaching, and student life environments. Natalie has extensive experience in public administration, governance, and delivery of services, including government services, information services, building and design, accommodation, maintenance, facilities management, and procurement services. And this includes the delivery of services across wide geographical areas. She served and is serving on a number of Commonwealth and state bodies and not-for-profits, education, superannuation, and research boards. Now, while this seems like a lot, I think it's really important to understand where both your guest speakers come tonight, because they have really vast experience, however, from very different areas. And what we're hoping is their different insights will provide an extremely fruitful conversation with regards to what our main topic is, and that is corporate governance and interorganizational partnerships. So going from here, I'm going to start off with the first question, and each speaker has been asked to give a 5 to 7 minute presentation to establish their positions, make sure that all the audience is on the same platform so that we can go into a deeper discussion without losing anyone. So I'd really like, Fanny, if you could please provide an overview by discussing your work on corporate governance and the different forms of capital and ways in which they can be brought together under different circumstances for reasons of innovation and digitization.
Thank you, Julie. And yeah, I'm happy to be here. Of course, it's a long-winded introduction and I don't think it's necessary. But anyway, so let me start off with the question of governance. So let me first share my thought process of what a governance process or a governance, the word governance in a sense means in any context, whether it is the government or whether it is corporate, a non-governmental organization, profit, for profit, not for profit. So I see that as a decision flow. It is more a mechanism for decision flow. It is how decisions are taken in expediting or achieving the objective of that particular entity. It could be anything. It could be a non-governmental organization. It could be a private entity. It could be a for-profit, not-for-profit. And the decision flow, essentially, he has a different level of hierarchical authorization levels. So based on primarily for addressing the fiduciary risk. that is the responsibility of an individual when taking a decision which may impact a larger group of people, has a huge financial impact. So essentially they look at a fiduciary risk, and hence this whole hierarchy of is set in place for with different levels of authorization to enable decisions. And this kind of a decision flow mechanism which is put in place, of course there are a lot of names in a lot of places, essentially could be either executive in nature or consultative in nature. That is, either they take the decisions on their own, or they have a process of consultative process through which they arrive and implement a particular. So this is what my thought process in the governance domain is. Of course, the basic tenet of an optimal governance structure or a governance mechanism or facilitating a decision flow essentially has a set of incentivization models which are already in place between all the stakeholders who are involved within that particular either an entity or a particular program. So this enables this incentivization mechanism, incentive-disincentive mechanism helps a lot in the smooth flow and aligning the objectives of all the various stakeholders to the stated purpose, which is essentially given as an initial. It is given. And then, of course, if I go further into this, this could be this particular decision flow has a different kind of dynamics or a mechanism for industry, which could be mostly for for-profit organizations, consists mostly of for-profit organizations, whereas and academia, which could be both for a for-profit and a not-for-profit kind of a thing, and social service, which is primarily not-for-profit or social organizations, and there are emergency services. We are essentially looking at what can be done, or what lessons we have learned in the pandemic, how we have brought all these things together. Emergency services could be both disaster management services, which essentially could be both for and not for profit, but primarily not for profit. And all these decision flow mechanisms are also overseen, or there's an oversight mechanism by the regulator or oversight bodies, compliance mechanisms, which are put by the government at some level. So there is always this oversight which enables this flow of decision without actually affecting. It's a balanced kind of a decision process wherein one set of group of people will not be benefiting from the this thing of another set of, or the loss of from the another set of people. Now, bringing this whole decision flow process into the context of, because the current decision flow process is in place essentially is aimed at where there's a time associated with the decision flow process. That is, there is a time associated with the decision flow process because of which these mechanisms are put in place, fundamentally having a time associated with the decision making process. But when it comes to a situation like a pandemic or a disaster management or any other such emergency situation where loss of life is immense, then these become very time sensitive. The decisions are time sensitive in that way. They become so time sensitive that many of the existing hierarchies or existing authorizations are completely destroyed, or they cannot be used in the current context. Though by default, if a decision model or decision making model or a governance model is put in place, it should be able to quickly adapt. But this adaptation is very difficult when such emergency issues come up in front of us. So it becomes very difficult to immediately change from a decision which I can normally take in a week. I have to take in within the next 15 minutes. So that makes it very, very, very difficult for this structure to actually address. So the primary reasons, if I can, the way I understood in this case is that given the pandemic, if I take the example of the pandemic, is that the primary reasons are mainly the rapid spread. And One is the rapid spread. The second dimension is that there is no known vaccination process in place, or nobody knows anything about the virus. I mean, it is completely unknown. It is a completely unknown kind of a thing wherein you don't have anything in place. You do not know what is going to be the trajectory of the growth or trajectory of the spread of the disease. You do not know what are the symptoms in many cases. Sometimes you know the symptoms, but they are misdiagnosed with other symptoms. So essentially, there is a whole kind of unknown trajectory through which this has spread. And then we have to, the whole system which is in place has to learn by experience and adapt dynamically. And this makes even the current decision even more difficult for decisions to be taken. And it is so difficult. And the primary thing they have initially addressed is that it is spread through contact, and airborne there is a limited spread, and there is a mutation which came later. So essentially, last 2 years have been really stressing the existing mechanisms which are in place. So this is my and that essentially given us a challenge which we needed to overcome with interorganizational cooperation, also moving the hierarchies, and then using very innovative and novel methods to reduce the loss of life. So this is, I think I am running out of time.
I'm keeping track, but if that's a natural pause, then I'm happy to go.
Yeah.
Is there any last word?
Yeah, I just wanted to leave it here so that we can talk when in the discussion component, we can go more into this, how this can be linked with the governance and the decision.
Yes, that'd be great, because I think you touched on a few things that Natalie in her experience will have comment on in terms of how decisions are made, working with multiple organizations and having that oversight method, but also CFA dealing with bushfires. You know a certain amount of information from the past, but each time it is unpredictable. So you do go from, a time associated with thinking, planning, and association in that sense, to the time sensitive where those structures are actually severely tested and they may not actually be appropriate for use. So Natalie, it'd be really great to hear a little bit on your thoughts before we enter deeper discussion.
Thank you very much. So that's a great sort of context to have a discussion about, and I guess my views on governance are not too much different from yours, Fanny. I sort of see it as a framework of accountability and authority used to keep an organisation stable and sustainable. So it's the network and the system that comes together to try and ensure that the organisation, can keep going fundamentally. If you think about the organisation as an organism, it's very important, I think, in the public sector environment, and that's largely my area of expertise, given the scrutiny and transparency requirements that exist on public sector organisations, and that scrutiny only gets more intense during times of crisis and during the periods when there is disruption, and we've certainly seen that, in Australia and certainly in Victoria during this time of the COVID sort of emergency, if you want to call it that. So there's a very high degree of scrutiny on public sector organisations, and that makes governance, in the embedding of governance, absolutely critical. It's, the way that I see it is that the governance systems need to be in place so that the organisations can withstand the shocks and the black swan events. If you think about COVID as a very long black swan event, if you had started out in that kind of COVID environment without your governance being solid, then it would be that much harder to withstand some of the challenges that are thrown around, that the pandemic has thrown. But it's not just, obviously pandemics, it's the whole sort of disaster resilience environment. And if I think through my experience, so I've worked, at the helm of a number of large organisations. So I ran the housing department in the state of Queensland for a number of years. That was, the state's largest provider of housing, 60,000 properties spread right across the state, and was at the helm there when Queensland was struck by, cyclone after cyclone after cyclone. I also ran the Department of Public Works there, which was the state's major construction and maintenance arm, and again, responding to natural disasters and the issues that come out of those and the challenges that they present for the governance models are very real. You're right, Fanny, you have to move quickly in those environments, and then you have to go back later and mop up, sort of around the governance arrangements. 8 years with La Trobe University, and again, we experienced natural disasters there, but also some real challenges around critical incidents, so student-related critical incidents in particular, and I think you have to look at those as sort of a crisis management environment. And now with the Country Fire Authority, and I'll just give the viewers a bit of a sense about what the Country Fire Authority is. So it is an organisation that provides the majority of protection to the state of Victoria, which is the most fire-prone region, certainly in Australia, but actually, sort of across a number of countries, the risks in Victoria for forest fires are extremely high. But the Country Fire Authority also protects cities, major urban areas, and we do it all with volunteers. So the Country Fire Authority has 55,000 volunteers spread across 1,200 brigades, and they can be in very, very remote locations in the state, as well as very urbanised environments. So the governance challenge in a place like the Country Fire Authority is quite different to what I've seen in my other jobs, which equally had big challenges. The volunteer context puts a completely different lens on governance and how you manage governance. So in any other organisation, even La Trobe, Julie, you can actually mandate governance requirements. You can say, you will all do it this way in creating the system of authority and accountability. And by and large, people will sign up for that because they're getting paid. So they'll go, yep, we'll do it that way, because there's a consequence, as you indicated, Fanny, of not doing it that way. But when you're running a massive volunteer entity, they don't have to do it the way you say that it should be done. They actually have choices, and they can choose to manage in different ways. So there's a big, disconnect potentially between what a normal system of governance might look like in a big structured paid organisation to the way you've got to manage governance in a volunteer organisation, where it has to be much more persuasion based and kind of working through systems that make sense from the volunteer's point of view, not necessarily from the organisation's point of view. One of the other interesting things about working in the Country Fire Authority environment, or any emergency services environment, is that you've effectively got two systems of governance that operate at different times. So when you're not in a high fire danger period, you're running the organisation along traditional organisational lines and more traditional governance models. And they are the more long-term, sustained, planned, the things that Fanny has talked about that you might see in a bank or an X or a Y. When we are in high fire danger periods, we are operating on an incident management governance model. And in our organisation, we can have 3 or 4 months of the year where that is all we are doing. So we're operating under command and control structures. We have a system in Australia, the Australasian Intersector Incident Management Framework, which is a fabulous framework that allows that connectivity. And I think we're talking about the connectedness, but it is a command and control incident management environment. And that brings a whole different set of arrangements to it, which allow you to move very quickly and make decisions very quickly. And it also sits with that in the systems that we use, the record keeping of why we've made the decisions and making those decisions on the run. And in the context of a public sector environment, as you indicated, Fanny, someone will always come back and question why you did those things. So there will be a commission of inquiry. There will be an investigation. There might be a coronial inquest. There will be inevitably scrutiny at the end of a major sort of incident. And so that sophistication that emergency services have been able to create in managing that quick decision making is actually something that I think other organisations can learn from in times of crisis. So at La Trobe University, for example, when the pandemic hit, we actually used that that system, because I'm familiar with it from years gone by, to manage our kind of daily and sometimes hourly decision making that we had to make around the kind of pandemic management process. And equally at the Country Fire Authority, we're using that methodology not only to manage the major fire incidents, but actually we've been using it to manage the COVID circumstance, because circumstances were changing, like this. All of a sudden we've got this happening, now we've got that happening. The trick is to not stay in that critical incident mode. When you're an organisation like ours, that's the comfort zone for a lot of our people, is to go to that rapid fire decision making. And so the downside for an organisation like ours is that more orderly, planned, strategic thinking around governance can get thrown out the window, and everybody just stays in reactive mode. And that's not good either. So I think that interesting combination of how you move from one mode to the other, take the best of one, set of governance mechanisms, which are very focused on, rapid fire and response, making the best decisions you can with what you've got, and moving when you can into that strategic, is a really interesting challenge, and one that that I have to kind of think about every day in what I'm doing. So I'm going to leave it at that. Julie, I hope that gives an interesting context.
Well, I've been listening to both of you very closely, and I know I had my original question that I was planning to lead with after you did this. However, what it actually highlights after the key tenets that both of you have addressed is this issue, it seems, of leadership, and what that leadership looks like in governance. And for me, because at one point I'll be bringing in a bit more of the digital and the technology, even the leadership in that sense, to be at the forefront leading into these emergency situations, and how it changed to rapid fire or a more distributed model, and what that means in terms of communication and governance. And I was wondering if you have any thoughts on that, having listened to each other, because both of you seem to be moving in that direction. What is leadership in this circumstance, and how do you get people to follow one particular goal to come up with an outcome, and to change back when the goals shift again?
Waiting to see if Fanny wants to go first, but I'll have a go. So look, I think there's a couple of things, and it is very, in my current context, leadership of a massive number of volunteers is very different to leadership of a paid workforce. And so that is, and it really is, the unifying factor about why people might want to volunteer in something like our organisation is what you have to constantly keep in mind. Why would someone want to willingly walk towards danger when everyone else is running away, and that, and they're doing it for nothing? They're not getting paid for it. So what is it that's driving people to do that? And how do I then, as a leader, take that passion and and use that to try and get the governance that we do actually need in place? You can't just let 55,000 people go off doing whatever they want. There has to be an organising structure and an authorising structure. So it's a constant sort of testing in that leadership position to go, how will this work for these people that we are asking to walk into very dangerous situations, helping people on the worst day of their lives or the worst week of their lives, and how do we kind of pull that together? So I think that's an interesting, it's an interesting challenge, and it's quite different to what you might do in a paid environment.
So one thing that comes to mind when we talk about leadership, the engaging a voluntary group of people and trying to get them to reach a certain objective, by default, a volunteer essentially is self-motivated in that sense. The thing we are trying to do is essentially giving them using the passion to take them forward. But when I am looking at a leadership kind of a thing, this is one component of implementation strategy. As a leader, what I need to, or what I need to understand, at least at either at the national level or at the institute level or at my own institute or maybe at an hospital or at a, what are the critical things which are completely stochastic in nature, which need to be addressed. That is, there is something there within the kind of requirements which we have, because this is particularly this pandemic, everybody was clueless. I mean, WHO was clueless, China was clueless. Everybody had no clue what this thing is and how it is going to spread. There is zero information, basically. There's nothing there. In that process, what are the kind of decisions which need to be taken? Particularly, see, for an administrator, it is a different ballgame. For a leader or a person who is a politically elected leader, it becomes even more difficult, because any wrong move, actually his career is gone. Say goodbye to my career in politics. So given that, what is the kind of strategy which needs to be put in place to actually overcome this? And here, the best which we have seen across countries, whether it is Australia, Italy, US, India, wherever it is, the technology essentially played a huge role. The technology intervention played a huge role in essentially trying to bridge this gap between particularly related to information gathering, because that was very critical. If I am having information, I need information. How do I make a decision? I'm a leader. I'm a good guy. I want to do this, or a good person. But how do I do this? I need information. How do I get that information? There is no standardized model for getting this information. And in every country, the way they did it, most of them converged in a specific model wherein they actually did it, through crowdsourcing. I mean, they got even the ideation component they did, because it was first thing they did was, okay, nobody move, everybody stay where they are. That is the immediate thing. But then how long would they stay? So essentially trying to see, once they stayed, then gathering the information which actually populates how my resources like hospitals, ventilators, oxygen, or whatever else is needed can be utilized. If I don't know this thing, then there is nothing I can do. If whatever I do will be with half information or almost zero information. So this played a very critical role, where most of them adapted an app or a technology intervention which allowed them to continuously trace the movement, the number of people infected, the daily rate of infection, the daily rate of fatalities, and how many are recovering at the initial stage. All this, there is no volunteer force on earth which could actually do this. And given India, I mean, it's impossible. Okay, so I'm not sure about other countries, but in India, it is almost an impossible. So the kind of intervention which was made, which was put in place and asked, it is a community-driven contact tracing application which was made, and which became the foundation for this whole strategy, which later on we used, whether it is trying to see ventilators or oxygen or what, medical personnel, technology, food. Even if I'm a lockdown, how do I do logistics, food, everything fell in place once this whole information. So I believe for governance and a leader, however capable they may be, they still need the ground level information, and that became a critical resource, particularly in this kind of situation where nobody knows anything. No one. I switched on a TV and I'll be listening with 10 people giving me 10 interpretations of what this whole thing is and how long it is going to take. No one has any clue. So I believe that this actually helped a lot in terms of addressing this pandemic. Then we started working on the vaccine, we started working on emergency responses, we started working on getting the ventilator, locally manufactured ventilators, oxygen cylinders, where oxygen is less. In phase 2, we have seen that it got mutated. So at any given point in time, I could move very quickly as a leader when my team is in place, I can move very, very quickly to address it so that I am not caught this unaware. And that, I think, was a critical learning in terms of this, at least when this is concerned. Really. And given the technology, the decision process is also very, it is, as you said, there will always be an inquiry, right? I mean, there is always an inquiry, period. It is taken as a given. But with this, the intervention of digital technology, what happens is most of the data is available. So the probability that at some point we may have an inquiry into what we have done would be much lower. So I think this actually helped a lot in overcoming the pandemic to whatever way. I mean, with minimal loss of life. Yeah. Thank you.
And are you seeing those sorts of parallels now with the CFA? I mean, although it works more in the bushfire area, and we read a lot of the news in Australia, same sort of thing where people are crowdfunding it. And we've also seen it with the floods recently up in Queensland in terms of the news and things. Within that, yes, you have entrepreneurial spirit and innovation coming through these technologies, and crowdfunding and crowdsourcing tends to almost be more of a social media rather than the traditional digitization we associate with crisis response.
Yeah, look, I think it is, there's a lot of interesting issues that come sort of into the emergency services space, and the CFA is interesting as well because we do have that very large volunteer base. So a number of those people are IT professionals. They're people that are in the space and interested in the space, and they, one thing about volunteers is they will develop stuff if they think it's needed. Now, the question is, scalability and sort of the rapid sort of activity. So there's definitely, the input into how things can be made better on the ground is a very significant matter, and one which our volunteer firefighters do actively get involved in, ideas and idea generation. Big data is also a massive issue in better preparedness and the safety of our firefighters and our communities. So the capacity to rapidly put together massive amounts of data from all sorts of sources to look at predictions, if a fire starts in this location and the wind's going at this speed and the ground cover is this dry, and those things, and creating those simulation models are very significant, both in terms of safety, community safety, firefighter safety, but also predictive, the predictive analytics. And so we're starting to see, a lot more sophistication in those areas. And I think increasingly the capacity to get on the ground in, rapid fire information to our people on the ground when there's a major incident, whether it's a fire or a motor vehicle accident or a high angle cliff rescue or whatever it happens to be, the capacity for them to be able to communicate to the aerial firefighting aircraft that we have, all of those sorts of things, data and information is the key to their safety. And we are constantly looking for how we can make that better, because we are, as I said, we're sending people, normal people like us, in to fight these massive fires.
So in both your cases, you're talking about the way that in two very different disaster type situations, the sharing of information with public, private, corporate, across different networks of organizations, and also the unpredictability of people wanting to help, as well as those situations. And it brings up, I guess, an interest for me that I know that Fanny's mentioned before, of how do you ensure that information, its security, and how do you take what people are doing on their computers and then start messing with blockchain, which many of us don't even know what it means, but how that might help with some of this, because there are issues. You don't want the data hacked when it's flowing in so many different directions. There needs to be a way to monitor it, make sure that it's quality data, that it hasn't been contaminated in any way, that it's secure and stored well, or even if for only temporary purposes, for the reasons that we need. And I was wondering, Fanny, whether you have any insights on that from some of the work at IIT Kanpur.
So let me share with you what we have, the way it has been done. And nobody wants to designate himself or themselves as a COVID affected, right? The moment, at least in this case, it would not be, not a very, because there is no financial incentive. If I'm saying that the only thing they can do is I am not infected. That is the only thing they can do. The app essentially gives you certain symptoms, which if you have to input the symptom, and then that gives the signal, and nothing else is there. And then he says that similar symptom people around you or surrounding you, whoever is using the phone, they can have these symptoms. So even if you have the symptoms and then you are not reporting, there is somebody else who would automatically see that, because they are afraid that it will come to them. So essentially they would report. So they will fill in the data for the and that way identifying, and people are worried about their lives. So this could be completely different from the bushfire kind of a scenario, and this is completely different in terms of where privacy is one of the least concerns. Security of the data is also one of the least concerns, because there is a study which was done and post this, where they have actually, I think it is published in Nature, that how this particular app essentially, what are the different levels of concerns expressed by individuals, and privacy was one of the least. It was not even significant. Nobody was worried about the data privacy part or security part. They just wanted people to know that this is happening and where can I get the best facility to go to or get immediately treated. This could be, this is the reason why in this case, in this particular case, particularly in this may not be true for other cases. So I'm not saying that it could be. But in this case of COVID pandemic, this was one strategy which really worked for every country. You can definitely see that there are no data breaches, there are no, even in blockchain, I know that recently there are a couple of things, but unless there is money involved, unless you're doing a monetary transaction, nobody has an incentive to essentially do this. Unless you are saying that, okay, I will use this data for political expedience. Maybe that we do not know. That I am not so sure of. But as far as this particular pandemic and this implementation is concerned, since there is no money involved, there is no, at least in India, there was no money involved in this, because everybody is getting a free vaccine. Everybody is supposed to be treated in a hospital for free, not being paid. So everybody is taken care of. The only thing people need to tell us is whether they have the symptoms or not. They have to self-monitor and do this. That is the only thing at the ground level. Once the data came through, then the shortages came in. The thing is, one thing is the predictive data. How do I predict? So that is where IIT Kanpur has intervened. They have used mathematical model to essentially say, given this public data, we can say that this particular phase will be over by this time, and it will be downtrending, and then it will again, the second phase will start at a specific end. These are high-end mathematicians who essentially gave a model, and they are mapping it on a daily basis, matching it with the existing trajectory of the thing. And most of the time they came out with this thing. Even for government, it became a thing, okay, it will go down. So I have a breathing space where I can keep ready for the next phase kind of. Secondly, what happened is the two critical resources when hospitalization occurred was oxygen and not the beds. Beds were never an issue. It is availability of oxygen at each location and a ventilator. These are the two things which are in short supply. So what we did, at least with the government, academic institution, because at that time we were not having immediately, no classes were also held. We were on a vacation. What we did was we mapped out the existing oxygen levels in all the hospitals and given a public open where a person can click and he will immediately know how many cylinders are available, how many cylinders have been produced, and how much. So there is no black marketing of this resource. Secondly, what we have done is we have created a technology which allowed us to tweak the normal oxygen manufacturers to put that in place so that they can get the highly filtered, the kind of oxygen which is needed for medical benefit. So it is a small tweak within the existing cylinder. And we said we are giving it open source to every local manufacturer across the country who wants to make, who want to shift immediately from these regular oxygen products. So every local area, there is no logistics involved. That is, I cannot get an oxygen cylinder from someplace down south to here, and then it will take a week or 10 days to do it. Then this is one way in which we address it. Information, then implementation. The same thing we did with the ventilator, where a couple of our kids who were startups essentially immediately went on and started creating one of the low-cost portable ventilators within a span of 60 days. And then that was immediately distributed to them. So there is a private entity, a startup entity which has come in place. There is academia which has come in place with the data thing. There is a digitization happening where the source information is coming from the government. All the interplay between these actually allowed us to roll out things in a much more smoother fashion. And of course, we definitely took a hit in the second phase when we were completely unprepared and we had a huge high loss of life. But still, we were able to really come out of it with much lesser damage than we would have. So everybody came together. Everybody came together. Like I used to say when I was a kid that the whole world will unite only if some extraplanetary guys are threatening us as a world. That is, if there is some threat which is coming completely, we are being threatened everywhere. Every person is being threatened. Then we'll all come together, forget our own internal this. I think in this case, that is what has happened for us. And digitization really did help a lot. We already had systems in place. We had this unique identity cards, and so we could immediately link a person to that number, and then so on and so. And the study clearly indicates that for a person who is giving this kind of information, they say it indicates that privacy was the least of their. So that is how it's not that it cannot be a concern, but at that for this particular instance, it was the least concern.
It's an interesting concept, that transparency and accountability. Natalie, what do you think of that, or how does that apply? Let's say in Australia, when we've heard more about people losing their houses and their identities.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's an interesting one. I think there's probably a set of information and applications and, sort of digitisation in the emergency services space where that makes sense and where there's no concern. But I think the risk to emergency services generally of cybersecurity, attacks is extremely high. So you can't compromise your systems in any way if that's going to affect the call taking and dispatch, the radio comms to our people on the ground, the fact that because we're managing and supporting large industry, so we have access to the kind of fire management plans for very large industrial entities who may be themselves the subject of potential for attack or undermining of their, the security of their systems. So it is something that we if something's going to be developed and hooked into our systems, we take a pretty strong view on that. Not just anything can, but there are other sets of information that you can, make available, and we do, we do a lot of work with our, with our tertiary research institutions, with interested parties, with the private sector, all of whom are contributing to this massive ecosystem of information and data. But when it comes to operations, we have to hold that very tight.
Thank you for that. If you both don't mind, I thought maybe I'll just go to a couple of the questions that are here. And the first one identifies that there's a public stake or interest in decisions that are being made, whether they're public or private, and within those different corporate governance structures. So within that, how do we actually just manage that as a stakeholder group, or how do you deal with that public stake? And or it might even be as well as that, who do you identify as the public?
So I think if you're as a long-term person who's worked in the public sector, every decision you have to assume that someone has a stake in. Every decision, you know, and that at any point someone is going to, you know, question those decisions. So that gets back to why is good governance important? It's important because you need to document as you go along. We're making this decision because of this. We've taken these factors into account, etc. Because, you know, at any point, whether it's through freedom of information or through inquiries or through, you know, any number of things, court cases, you know, coronial inquests, etc., the decisions that have been made will be scrutinised in some way, as they should be, because they're, you know, we are spending taxpayer dollars, etc. So it puts the onus, you know, is very much on the organisation to have those good governance mechanisms in place. And I think that's the way you have to see it. It's your job to make sure, in my case, to make sure that those things happen and that, you know, and that we're able to kind of keep records of why we've done things. And of course, you know, again, the importance of that in terms of then, you know, having the good record keeping systems, the digitisation, so you can trace and track documents quickly and easily, and you know, that whole underpinning of our technological layer and application layer is so critical in all of that.
And Fanny, your comments?
So in this case, the public, now at least in what we think is the public, essentially is the social media and press. You know, for us, it's what flags of anything. You know, they have a say. It's not that they don't have a say. Everything is not. Earlier, it used to be that I do a decision, maybe by the time it was into the public domain, it may take a month or 2 months and are completely hidden. But today, whatever decision I take essentially is either leaked or is scrutinized by the public on a minute basis. That is the whole technology component which came in place. And now there is nothing like away from scrutiny at all. You know, I mean, whether it is a government, whether it is corporate, whether it is they are whistleblowers, they are people. So there is a whole set of tools, digital tools, which allow this scrutiny and then keep the governance in check. Unlike earlier time, where there used to be a time lag. Now it is not. Now it is instantaneous. The moment somebody says even a single word out of place, we are in trouble. You know, so. And we had similar kind of things even on our social media, where we really got trawled for one letter out of place. It was not done intentionally, it was done unintentionally. But then we had to do a lot of damage control, and then we always have this right to information acts. And I mean, there's a whole set of public voice which is now embedded into the. So now when I take a decision, I also take a decision based on the fact that I may have an RTI question, right to information question, which may come up, or I may have some social media post which actually kills me on whatever decision I've done. So keeping this, so I am essentially, in a sense, controlled by the way I make decisions. Of course, sometimes it will be against the interest of the public, because then I'm afraid to take a decision just because these people may take it in the wrong way. But other than that, you are always keeping this in mind when you're taking it. Not like, okay, I take a decision, you know, by the time it comes out anyway, I'm out of office kind of a thing. No, it's not that way. Now, at least, it's not there. So everything is scrutinized. For instance, we asked our students to, in the pandemic, when the second phase came in, we allowed them to come in. And then suddenly we said, why don't you guys return? Because they said going to lockdown again. Then said, why don't you guys return home? Then there's a huge set of social media outbursts saying that how can you send people now in this, when there's a lockdown in a week, you are sending them home. No explanation will convince them, because I have 7,000 students on campus and 300 faculty on campus and no resources whatsoever to put them in if they are feel sick, I cannot give them anything. I said, who are better placed, their parents or me? I mean, I'm one step away, right? I mean, they are my responsibility. Yes, we do understand their resilience will come. And these are children, kids. But then their parents, whatever I do, if something happens, the parents will always blame me for this. So we try to convince the student that the best way is to be with your people so that they can take care of you. And whatever resource you want, even when you are there, we are willing to provide. We are willing to give you. Even if you don't have money, we are willing to see that you will not have any resource, this thing of resource for allowing you to get into a hospital. Not only you, your family, no worries on that. But you need to have a support system which will take care of you. Here, if one faculty is saddled with 200 students whom he has to take care, I mean, it's not possible. So these kind of, even these small decisions in a small academic environment, it is up to scrutiny and it is up to criticism, even though it is in the interest of the students. So it happens.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because you do highlight, I guess, one of the failures of systems is when they work, people put so much trust in them to tell them what to do, that when the systems that we use to communicate and our different ways of organizing information and sharing it changes, we're in these situations where people are looking for someone else to tell them how they should act and respond. And in which case it leaves the realm of technology and goes very much back into the hands of appropriate leadership. And through that, negotiating with others to create the governance so that the messages don't conflict to get a better outcome. And on that, I think it's a good place to end. However, someone did ask a question here about climate action, and I apologize to the participant who's asking this, because the original question is how important is climate action in minimizing these crises into the future? But I'd like to flip that question to keep with this governance, and that is, as climate change continues to happen and we try to organize ourselves to deal with it, do you think that there's anything that you've learned from your research or careers or even the discussion today on some of the key elements that we might need to focus on so that other people who are in the audience and listening can go away and consider how they might take action?
So I think if, people are familiar with the, sort of sequence of events that's happening in Australia at the moment, where we've had massive flood after flood after flood. We've got a low out over New South Wales now. We, our entity will be sending our people in to help. That comes off the back of, 2 years ago, massive fires right through the east coast of Australia, and we'd never seen that kind of scale of fire. We've had massive fires in WA that, again, our entity's been sending people over to help. So it's real and it's rapid. So the kind of rapidity of events now is it appears to be escalating. And so I think, what do people take away from that? Well, I guess, to take away from that is, how do we use, the sort of technological underpinnings to get better predictive capability and or better capacity to assist people when the incidents are on. And I think that focus has to be driving towards community resilience, not community reliance. So we've seen a shift, I think, in the last few decades of, to your point, Fanny, someone should do something about this, this community view that someone else should do something. And, if we're going to see the scale of these kinds of events continue the way they have been, there aren't enough people in the universe to be the someone. So the community resilience has to be the key, not community reliance. And so how do we use technology and digitisation and sort of the underpinnings of the cleverness that we have to try and support the resilience and not have people sitting back waiting for someone else to come and help them, because it may not be that that's possible if we've got these kinds of issues escalating.
Any response to that?
So from a financial standpoint, so this climate action is not really the problem with climate action is that the consequence of a particular climate action is not directly attributable to that particular nation which is essentially doing it. Neither is the way they don't take an action and some other nation is suffering, right? I mean, if they're telling me Australia is having more and more of these, that means it is not because Australia is going for not doing enough for in climate action. No, it is a global issue. I mean, somebody does something somewhere and then I am the guy. And so I cannot actually link what I am suffering to that particular entity, which essentially is the initial this thing of for this particular. So that is why this whole global action kind of a thing where everybody is supposed to come together and then try to address is becoming. But then it again has its own interest in lobbying interest, which essentially does not make it move through. I mean, look at what Kyoto Protocol, when it happened to till date, even today in Japan, I see all the ACs put on 26 and nowhere else in the world that they are put on 26 degrees centigrade. Any AC, there is no AC in Japan which is allowed to go below 26. So it is not done. I mean, the thing is, the accountability part is missing. With technology, now with this, we can immediately say, okay, guys, this is where it is coming from. So there should be some action at some level, unless otherwise we are all going to be doomed. There is an interesting thought process. So what now the new thought process is, in migration, in immigration, in a nation, when they put immigration policy, they normally have these political refugees or, politically sensitive areas or some. So they have their own stringent regulation for allowing other people to come, and even though there is enough resources there, they would not allow, right? But in the climate thing, if you can say this climate refugees, the climate refugees are responsibility of every country, then essentially it becomes a new thought process where you are saying that you come up with a new policy for climate refugees. So if you are doing something because of which there are floods and these guys become refugees, then essentially these guys should be given allowed to emigrate to your place to do whatever they want to or take up their lives from that point. There is no disincentive or incentive for this in the world. So that is the major issue. So whatever we do as a community, we try to reduce, but our reduction and our climate change is going to impact somebody else, not us directly. It may to some extent, but not us. Unless everybody comes together, it is not going to happen. And that means your technology essentially should be able to let us know what is the cause and effect. Where is the cause and where is the effect? And if that chain is not really clear, till then everybody is going to blame everybody else and somebody is going to suffer for the follies of someone else. So this is the whole situation. So it's not a very encouraging kind of a thought, but I really feel bad that this is happening. I mean, and Asia we are seeing, India we are seeing, Australia we are seeing, and we don't have resources to tackle this. I mean, it is much larger. The number of deaths in COVID are much lesser than number of deaths in climate change. Believe me, in some sense.
Yeah, and I think that response is a good note to end on, because I think it does highlight we have governance, international governance, all these systems of governance where these technologies are used and people are communicating, knowing where to go, how to go, and being able to access the resources to go, and therefore enabling communities to have agency and to respond and to hold governments accountable. Yet at the same time, there also has to be a system where those in governance take on the leadership to be accountable and allow themselves to be influenced and to change. And it will be very interesting to see how all of this plays out, because within all of this, you have the use of technologies in ever complex ways that permeate our lives, and also the need to ensure we have enough cybersecurity that we can protect ourselves as we negotiate these new spaces of engagement. I'd really like to thank both of you for your well thought out contributions tonight. It was excellent to hear about the sort of research that's happening and some of the philosophical underpinnings of why it is that we do as we do as people and organizations as we negotiate change and decision making. And it was really excellent as well to hear the experiences of what does it mean on grounds when you're trying to deal with people. And in this sense, I think the volunteer situation is fantastic. There is no directive. So in which case you have to gain the imaginations, the minds, and have the appropriate narrative so that people understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, why it's important they contribute, and what the value is, not only for themselves, but for their communities. I've found it absolutely fascinating, and I hope that the audience has enjoyed this session as much as I have. Thank you both.
Thank you very much.
Bollo. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Fani, Professor Julie, for very nicely handling this session, and Ms. Natalie for your very valuable thoughts and comments on different issues raised. So we appreciate your presence here. And on behalf of Academy, I must thank all of you and also the audience who have been continuously interacting with the speakers, actually posting some of the questions. But if you have any further question, you are free to send it through email to either Academy office or directly to one of the speakers. So thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And thank you very much, Diana, for arranging everything. So.